So this is actually week 2 of this series, You've Heard It Said. For those of you who are relatively new, this year we're alternating between disciple training, DT, and services. But our series that we are doing are continuing all the way through. So last week at DT, we spoke about anger and murder and the connection that Jesus made between those two things. And tonight we're going to be talking about adultery that Jesus refers to and lust. Now, it's important to understand that the reason we do this series is because Jesus, in his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, he tends to go a lot deeper than maybe some of us are familiar with. For some of you, might be aware of some really deeply sad news a couple of weeks ago within the kind of Christian world. I don't spend a lot of time on social media or kind of looking up news articles, but this was a pretty big one. Some of you might be aware that Philip Yancey came out, and Philip Yancey is a pretty prominent Christian author. And he, this wasn't kind of a slam piece, he self-revealed, he disclosed the fact that he'd been having an affair for almost, I think it was 9 years. And that kind of came out publicly, and it was just really painful. You know, it's painful in the Christian world to see people, any people, but particularly people of prominence, and for whom a lot of people who kind of stake a lot of relational currency on or a lot of inspiration from, I suppose to be seen that there are these kind of insidious undercurrents and behaviours that really are like anti what has been communicated by them. And so I don't kind of say this in order to gossip, but it's a great reminder that even long respected leaders are not immune to the struggles of the heart. Like, we're not immune to the struggles of the heart. And so moments like this, when we hear news like this, they're really, really sobering. And not for the purpose of judgment or gossip. And, you know, part of the lament that I have around when these things come out, seeing Christians kind of like jump on all sorts of angles and want to burn his books. And like, there's just pain. There's a lot of pain there, right? And I mean, there must be massive pain for his wife, first and foremost, right? But it just shows, right, that no one is immune. And Jesus, in his teachings, I think this is one of the reasons why he refuses to stop at just outward behavior. You know, he wants to deal with the heart issue. He wants to deal with what's actually going on inside. Because what remains unaddressed in the heart, right, what we don't address in the heart, eventually surfaces in our lives and relationships, right? It can't be hidden away for too long. And so that's why this particular series, I think Jesus likes to go deeper. He likes to hit on the heart issue. And so we're going to look at this text tonight here in Matthew chapter 5. It's a pretty confronting text, and I think that's for good reason. He says here in Matthew 25, verses 27 to 30, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Verse 29, "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." Now, obviously, a few kind of really important kind of textual notes here. You know, we're not just talking about men, right? The specific example Jesus uses here is looking at a woman lustfully and that he's committed adultery in her heart. But the same is true, right, for women or for men. The issue is the lust, right? There's something going on between that particular action and the heart. And so what Jesus is doing in this teaching, he's revisiting what were familiar commands, and is he exposing their kind of deeper original intent. Ian mentioned last week one of the Jesus' famous lines as he's kind of shaping all of these, you've heard it said teachings, is, "I have not come to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill it." Now, this word abolish and fulfill, these were rabbinic terms that rabbis would use. If you felt like somebody had an interpretation of a law, because that's what it is, an interpretation of the law that was wrong, it wasn't what God intended, that was what was known as abolishing the law. That particular rabbi with his particular interpretation, known as a yoke, has abolished that law. On the counterpoint, in order to fulfill the law, was a statement made when it's like, that is what God's heart was for that law. And there would be rigorous debates around all the laws that contained within the Old Testament. And so there'd be people saying, oh, you abolished that law, you fulfilled that law. And so this is what Jesus was wanting to do. He was saying, I've not come to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill the law. And this wasn't about some sort of kind of surface level righteousness, but it was about inward transformation. This is what Jesus wanted to talk about, what actually goes on inside. Because the goal, God's original intent was wholeness, integrity, and freedom. Not moral performance, not I do all the right things, or at least I do all the right things on the surface and no one else knows what else is going on, right? The goal is wholeness, shalom as it's described, peace, which isn't just about the absence of conflict, but rather it is about freedom that comes from being in God. Now, when we talk about these you've heard it said laws, it's important to remember that the people who received these original laws had been former slaves, right? So these laws didn't drop out of the sky, right? These laws that Jesus is referring to around murder and adultery, they're part of what is known as, for us, as the Ten Commandments. These commandments that were given to a people at Mount Sinai in order to lead them from a history of 400 years of being enslaved toward a people he has called to represent him. And that's a big journey, right? To go from a dehumanized status across 400 years, generation after generation, where you are treated as nothing, to suddenly being called to be the people who ought to represent Yahweh, God, in the world. There's some transformation that needs to occur. There is some falsehoods that need to be undone and replaced with truth. And so these lists of rules, we might say, these laws, aren't actually so much you just need to obey these commandments as much as it is about restoring dignity and wholeness to a people in order that they might represent him today. And that's the same is true for us, right? This was actually a grace of God. God is saying, I want to give you these laws as a gift to guide you toward a greater sense of wholeness. Not some sort of tick list that I just need to not murder or commit adultery. And this is what Jesus wants to tap into. And so this is the kind of the core tension that Jesus wants to address tonight. In verse 27, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, right? That was the law. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, a man lustfully, has already committed adultery with them in their heart. And so Jesus is saying, okay, it's not enough to not commit adultery, right? It's not enough to not commit adultery. Committing adultery is bad. It's destructive for you and for others, right? But Jesus is saying there's something deeper going on here. There is a deeper and a freeing work that God wants to do in our hearts, which is why tonight we need to talk about lust. And that's why Jesus starts talking about lust, because it's not enough not to just commit adultery. Now, it's important to understand a couple of things about lust. First of all, desire itself, like to desire something, right? That's actually not the problem. Sometimes when we talk about lust and that kind of stuff, we're like, oh, if only we could eliminate desire, then that would solve everything, right? It's very Buddhist, actually. But desire is not the problem. In fact, God made us as sensory creatures. We see this in Genesis chapter 3 here, verses 4 to 6. I'm going to read it from the screen because I don't have my notes. It says here, and this is the serpent talking. This is the anti-God figure talking, in this case, to Eve, the female in the garden. He says, you will certainly not die if you eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, the one tree that God commanded them not to eat. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Verse 6, when the woman saw that the fruit on the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye. That's a very important detail, right, in the text. And also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So there's this sense in which there's this incredible detail that is added there in the text. It's like, why do you need to know that they saw the fruit of the tree and it was good for food and pleasing to the eye? Like there was an element of attractiveness of that particular food. The fruit looked good. And this is important. in most cases, there are good things that are nothing wrong with them inherently, right? These creation, bodies, beauty, these are good gifts from God. The problem is when this desire that God has created us for is misdirected. Because the fruit in this story, it came to represent another way. It's like you had God's way in the garden under his rule and his authority and relationship with him, and you've got this incredible freedom to do whatever you want except for this one thing. And yet, that choice to take the fruit, that attractive fruit, came to represent a different way, and that was life apart from God. And so by giving into temptation, which we all do, right, Adam and Eve are essentially claiming that God isn't good. It's like, God, the world that you have given us, it's like, I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's good enough. And so we're going to pursue this beautiful thing in order to have that which you are not offering to us. And so they're giving into this deception that there is actually a good apart from God, who we know is the source of all that is good. And so it's this deception that starts to creep into the narrative. And it's not, again, the issue of desire, it's actually a misdirected desire. And this is where lust comes in, because lust is not appreciation, it's actually rebellion and replacement. And I'm going to build on that a little bit more. Because again, we're sensory creatures. There are good things, there are beautiful things, things that God created that we ought to desire, but at the same time, we cannot allow them to deceive and enslave us. And that is exactly what lust does. I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way. See, what lust does is it promises what it can't deliver. Lust kind of feeds this fulfillment kind of idea that somehow some sort of good exists beyond God himself, right? It grows out actually of a place of discontentment, a lack of satisfaction or peace. And so you kind of have this kind of searching mentality. It's like when I'm not feeling at peace, when I'm not feeling at ease, when I'm not feeling fulfilled, I start to go and look for goodness somewhere else. I like to think of it sometimes as that kind of sonar feature on submarines. And so, you know, you just kind of go around, so it's like beep, beep, beep. And this sonar is on and you're looking for something. It's like I'm not satisfied, and so there's this radar, this sonar that's currently on. It's like just searching and searching and searching because there is kind of a lack of kind of contentment within one's heart. And so the first thing it does is it promises something and it actually ultimately won't deliver on that. The reason is because lust actually enslaves our mind. Now there's this Greek word epithumia, and it comes from two particular words, epi meaning over or above, and thumia, which means the mind. And essentially what it's saying is that lust dominates the mind. Because if contentment feels impossible without that thing that I'm looking toward, then it has already owned me. If I can't feel contentment unless I have that person, that car, that particular outcome, that bit of food, if I can't have contentment without that, it's already owned me. It has owned me. And it has this way of essentially dominating our mind. And so we lose focus on everything else because I just need that in order to feel fulfilled. I've got one more here. Lust then dulls and then it escalates. And this is kind of the tragic part of what lust does, right? In Ephesians chapter 4, it says this. Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, "So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking." Verse 18, "They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts." Now, there's a lot of metaphor in there, right? That's a big sentence. I'm going to keep going and we'll come back. Verse 19, "Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed." So the key words there, see in verse 19, having lost lost all sensitivity. Alpagio, right? And basically it means that I no longer am sensitive, right, to the beauty of something that it once had. It's like if we take that kind of lemon slice that is over there tonight, it is a beautiful thing. You look at it, it's attractive to the eye and good for wisdom and food. And then you go over there and you take a piece and it is delicious and you go, wow, that was a beautiful thing. How delightful. I'm not lusting after it. I just wanted to be able to appreciate it because I am a human with desire. But then I go for a second piece because my self-control is waning. And then I go for a third piece and a fourth piece. Now, does the fourth piece taste as good as the first piece? Rarely so. Does the fifth piece, the sixth piece? No, it doesn't. We actually start to kind of dull from the beauty. Now it's just consumption, right? I just need more. And somehow our mind has lost a level of sensitivity to what originally started as something beautiful. And what happens is a lack of sensitivity actually leads to a lack of restraint. This is the slippery slope. When I lose sensitivity, I lose restraint. So the thing that I used to be able to have self-control with, now I just go down that slippery slide and I get more and more and more, and it's more and more destructive. It promised something. It didn't fully deliver on that, so I go for more and more. And in the same process, I lose sensitivity. I end up darkened in our understanding, enslaving the mind. And that's exactly what Paul points out. He's like, hey, they've gone down this trajectory, and I want you to not live as the Gentiles do. Now, there's a whole lot of cultural background there around what's going on in Ephesus at the time, but we know that just what can occur in Ephesus can occur in our lives too and around us, right? This is not a new idea, where people want more but are never satisfied. And so this is why when Jesus talks about, hey, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery, but I tell you, he's wanting to pick up on this trajectory piece. You see, because what happens is when lust promises first what it doesn't deliver, and then it enslaves our mind, and then it dulls and escalates and has this kind of sense of loss of sensitivity, what we end up with is despair. It's like, this was supposed to deliver and it didn't. And now I feel an emptiness because it didn't deliver what it was supposed to. And despair leads to anger, which is the thing that Jesus just spoke about again. Why didn't it deliver? And anger, of course, has two directions. We either direct it inward toward ourselves, where we feel depressed because I'm angry at myself, or we outwardly direct it in the form of usually destructive behaviors. And so this is the slippery slope of what lust is. Again, desire is not the problem, all right? It's a misdirected desire that says this will offer something that God doesn't. And so it shouldn't surprise us then, because of how dangerous this trajectory is, the kind of language, the loaded language that Jesus uses in this text. I don't know if it confronted you when you first read this. You know, it's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell, right? If your right eye or your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. Again, it is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. And so Jesus here is talking about a trajectory, and this isn't like an exaggeration. He's saying this is where this will lead. Now, hell, I know we often think about as a future reality, but hell, Gehenna, as he was referring to, was just as much a present reality in their understanding of the day, right? Gehenna was the valley of Hinnom on the outside of Jerusalem, which was essentially a rubbish pile, and it was known as a place where the fire never went out. They would burn the rubbish there, and so there would always be smoke coming out. And so Jesus, when he's teaching these things, he's going, you head down this trajectory, that's where you're headed. That's what your life is going to look like. And of course, that has eternal realities to it as well. But Jesus is pointing out to these people, this isn't just about your future, this is about what it's doing to you in the present. And this is a warning from Jesus, motivated by love and the desire to essentially interrupt this destructive practice. He's like, I know you've heard don't commit adultery. But actually, if you just use that as your like plumb line benchmark, there is a potential that you might end up in this hellish existence while putting your hand up and saying, I didn't commit adultery. And he wants something better for us. You see, Jesus is not only concerned with outward faithfulness. He loves outward faithfulness. Like, it must bring him immense joy when we live the way we were created to live. That's fine. But he's also concerned with freeing our hearts from desires that enslave us and distort love, right? And so this is why he goes so hard on this adultery piece. Now, if you were here last week, I want to make something really, really clear, because one of the ways that the Sermon on the Mount is misinterpreted is people use it sometimes as a means by which to essentially give instruction around managing sin. It's like, okay, well, now that we know that not commit adultery, that's okay. I didn't actually think that was a risk, because we were naive, but now I've just got to control my lust. And so it becomes just a different set of tick responses in order to be that righteous kind of person. But this is not about managing behavior or avoiding failure. As Dallas Willard, I referred to him last week at DT, Jesus did not come to give us a gospel of sin management. Right? This is not what he was about, okay? What he wanted for us was a transformed life from the inside out. It's not just, I avoid these things and so I'm right with God. That's the opposite to grace. The goal is not this kind of white-knuckled restraint. Just don't get angry. Just don't lust. And just don't whatever we've got next in this series. Like, is that freedom? It's not. Is that peace? Is that what Genesis 1 and 2 looked like? No. God has something better for us. A reformed desire. So there's a couple of things, however, even though we're not trying to just manage our sin, that we can learn from these texts around how to, I suppose, get a little handle if we feel like maybe a type of lust has mastered us. And there are many types of lust. And so I just want to kind of highlight a couple of these things. The power of gratitude and the power of elimination. These are just some kind of handles where we might, maybe there are some things in my life that I can make adjustments to in order to maybe free my heart a little bit more from this. I mean, the first one I already mentioned as drawing out from Ephesians chapter 5, the power of gratitude. Remember, lust starts when we have this dissatisfied sense of self. It's like when I'm feeling dissatisfied, I go looking, the radar's on, looking for something that can promise something that I am craving. Now, we talked in Ephesians 5, or should I say Ephesians chapter 3, should I say, or 4, should I say, about that dullness and loss of sensitivity. Paul continues on this in Ephesians chapter 5, and he said, rather than going down that trajectory, you've seen the Gentiles go down that trajectory, and I want something better for you than that. Rather than that trajectory, in verse 18 to 20, he says, instead be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. Essentially, he's saying, hey, take every opportunity to declare what is true. This isn't about having a good singing voice or all that kind of stuff. This is about songs are about declaring what is true about God and about ourselves. And so speak to one another, share with one another what is true on a regular basis. Songs from the Spirit who Jesus gave to lead us into all truth. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. See, you don't have to sing. Make it from your heart. Always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Like, this is the power of gratitude. When we live our lives with a lens through which is like, actually, what does it look like to be grateful for the opportunities and what I have? This is a way that actually transforms our heart and doesn't allow lust to get the grip, right, that it wants to get on our heart. So that it can't come from this place of dissatisfaction where the radar goes up and suddenly something promises something that it ultimately won't deliver, but looks attractive to the eye. See, lust fixates us on what we don't have, where what gratitude does is it recenters us on what God has already given to us, right? And so contentment has this way of retraining our desire and restoring joy, right? Where suddenly look at something like, that is beautiful, that is good, right? Without that craving that we so often need. The second thing is drawn from this text itself. Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. I always think this is a really funny thing because we know that elimination is not salvation. Do you know why? Because blind, handless people can still lust. It's really important. If you're blind and you're handless, you can still lust, right? So even though Jesus is using this very kind of literal kind of like language here, it's important to understand he's wanting to get to the heart of what is going on. So while elimination is not salvation, what it does is wisdom makes space for healing. And so sometimes we just need to cut off things in order to actually not have them in our world so much so they don't become things that we ought to crave. So if you're kind of like, you know what, actually I'm lusting after a lot of chocolate, right? I used to enjoy it, but I no longer do, and it's starting to master me because I need it, then actually there is some wisdom in kind of cutting yourself off from that. There is a wisdom in just kind of going, I don't need to have lots of blocks of chocolate in the fridge. Like, that's not helpful to do so. If I don't buy it, it doesn't become that same kind of lust, right? So it's not salvation. It hasn't dealt with the issue, but there is a wisdom in that of going like, I can just eliminate it. And so that's what I think what Jesus, part of this kind of elimination piece in this drastic language, it's just cut it off. Just get rid of it. Just like, it's unhelpful in that moment, isn't it? You know? And so there's this sense in which there is wisdom in actually cutting off things that are ultimately unhelpful. I mean, we can't avoid all temptation, of course not, but we can reduce unnecessary exposure. And maybe that means being wise with the media we consume, the browsing we do. Sometimes it's the people we engage with. Like, I'm not here to deliver the rule on this is how you must do it, right? You know your story. But there's an element of kind of going like, you know what, maybe I just need to cut it off. I shared a story, I think it was late last year. I was watching a Netflix series and I was perturbed by the language that was being used in it. I was like, it was just one, I just felt like it was unnecessary, like the kind of the crass language that was being used. It was a great TV show. It was good, beautiful, pleasing to the eye. But there was this element where I'm just like, that's unhelpful. And I started to notice that I wasn't verbalizing the language that was being used in that particular television show, but my interior life, as I was going around, I'm going, what is that language rolling around my mind for? I mean, I would never be so crass as to actually say it out loud. Gosh, Christian wouldn't do that. But like, seriously, why was these additional adjectives sitting in my mind? And I'm like, I just think I need to cut it off. Now, I'm not saying the TV show was evil. In fact, it was well written to a degree. It was good and pleasing to the eye, but I just didn't need it. It just wasn't going to be helpful. And maybe the lust in that case was for a type of control and aggression and power over others that I thought this language could deliver, but ultimately was destructive. You know, we've each got our own story. And I'm not saying this because I'm like, I'm so holy because I eliminated it. It was just wise. It was just a wise thing to do. And so gratitude and elimination, they work hand in hand with protecting our heart from the dangerous outcome that Jesus doesn't want us to engage with, that pathway, that trajectory. So, I close with this idea. Jesus isn't after just our white-knuckled restraint. Just don't commit adultery. Now the bar's high, just don't lust. Rather, he's wanting to offer us freedom because lust shrinks our capacity to love people well. It enslaves us, it masters us, it has that way of deadening us to the beauty of the world. And so I simply ask this question not as a condemnation piece, but as a bit of kind of like, hey, is there anything that Jesus wants to free you from? Is there any kind of path that Jesus wants to say, hey, gratitude, elimination, what's your heart here, guys? Is there a desire that is currently enslaving you that you need to address? Is there something that's like, I feel like I need that because God isn't delivering? So I just want us to take a moment to consider that for ourselves, and then I'm going to pray and we're going to close with one final song. My hope is that this sermon isn't one where you go away feeling condemned. I don't think that's actually what Jesus wanted. He wanted it to be a warning, to not be satisfied with just not committing adultery, but rather he wanted us to experience the transformation of our hearts that God created us to live in. So let's just take a moment and then I'll pray. Jesus, thank you that when you came to reveal what God is like, your message wasn't do better, but it was be free. And so, God, I want to pray, Lord, for each of us here and anyone who might be watching this in the future. God, you know what's going on in our hearts and whether there's things that have taken us captive to whatever degree. And God, you know what you're working with. You choose to engage regardless. We don't pretend to be something that we're not. But God, would we cultivate a heart of gratitude? Would we not buy into the kind of temptations that come from misplaced desire? God, where we have fallen short, we thank you for your forgiveness. And God, we are thankful for all that you have provided. Help us to eliminate that which is just unhelpful for us, so that we might step into a trajectory that is heavenward. There is greater freedom, greater intimacy with you, and that peace that you created us to experience. In Jesus' name we give you thanks. Amen.